Thank you all for attending today's session for Professional Services and Human Capital Categories Office Hours. My name is Alyssa Wong, and I'll be hosting today's session. Today's topic is on the CALC Plus Pricing Suite. The office hours session is an open forum for federal acquisition professionals to ask their contracting questions and learn various ways to support their professional services acquisition using GSA tools and resources. Before we begin today's session, I'm going to go over a few housekeeping items. Please note today's meeting is being recorded, and if you wish to opt out, you may do so at any time. All phone lines will be muted during the presentation. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A pod at the bottom of the screen to ask. We'll attend to them at the end of the presentation, and if we run out of time, we'll do our best to respond following the webinar. Today's presentation deck was sent out to all registered attendees prior to the event. Please check your inbox from PSHC events at gsa.gov for the slide deck. And if you're unable to locate it, please send an email to PSHC events gsa.gov and we'll provide a copy. You can also download today's presentation directly from the chat box. This will only work if you're using the Zoom app and not the online version. And today's webinar will be posted on our YouTube playlist, PSHC YouTube playlist, in about 3 weeks. Lastly, you'll receive one CLP for attending today's webinar. Those will be emailed to you within 7 to 10 business days. You don't need to provide an email address because Zoom has captured that already. Finally, we have a post-event survey that will be emailed to everyone on today's call. We ask that you take a few minutes of your time to please fill that out. And now I am going to turn it over to Mark, who is our presenter today. Thank you, Mark.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Lisa. Yeah, we'll get started with the training. If it's okay, please hold your questions. We do have a Q&A session at the end. So yeah, hold for those items. There may also be some time intermittently as after we cover a major concept where if you have a question, please feel free to ask that. So for example, we'll go through hourly labor ceiling prices, and then there'll be a small gap for questions there. So in the training today, I'd like to go through buy.gsa.gov and the items that are in Pricing Central. So the goal of Pricing Central is to provide contracting professionals, contracting representatives, and program managers with pricing data related to services acquisition. So this can help with market research, can help to develop an IGCE, can help to determine if prices are fair and reasonable or not as well. And Alyssa, I think there's something. Oh, yeah, thank you. Yeah, so we'll kind of go through the core applications that are within the pricing suite within this training. And the core applications are the first four if you're reading from left to right. So it's the Calc Plus Quick Rate tool that uses ceiling rate data. It's the Calc Plus Quick Rate BLS tool, which uses BLS labor rates and hourly. Yeah, it's hourly labor rates, and then prices paid data and a intergovernment um, cost estimate capability as well. So I'll go through each of these applications and kind of teach you the ins and outs, provide tips and tricks to each of them, and communicate kind of the best use cases for each of them related to your acquisition objective. All right. So there are, yeah, as I was saying, there's three primary data sources to pull from. So there is the ceiling rate data, which is represented by the multiple award schedule program that GSA manages. It is the largest contract vehicle in the federal government. So is a whole lot of pricing data that's currently out there. We are also actively working to increase the volume of ceiling rate data that's available, and substantial increases will be happening in the near future as we implement some new capabilities. There is also the BLS data in the BLS tool. So BLS stands for Bureau of Labor Statistics. They're one of their primary functions is to capture hourly wage rates across the entire United States in every single geography and industry, and then provide that information to be available for use. So we basically ingested that data and then provided steps to fully burden that data so it can be comparable to other hourly labor rates. Another item we have is prices paid data. So this comes from the MAC and GWAC vehicles that we manage. These are government-wide large contracts where we're collecting prices paid data as part of our business process. All right. Yeah, thank you. Okay, the next slide. So I want to kind of go through what is a loaded rate versus a unloaded rate, because I'll be using this terminology quite frequently throughout the session. So unloaded rates are just wage rates, and there's multiple kind of cost types that go into an hourly rate that a vendor charges. There's a wage rate, which is about 40 to 50% of the overall hourly wage rate, and then there is overhead rates, fringe benefits, G&A, and profit as well that kind of makes up the other 50 to 60% of the costs that a vendor charges. So, for example, fringe benefits is the benefits that employee is receiving. Overhead is the financial support, the building, the internet connection, all those things that are going to support that employee or contractor in completing their job, and then the profit as well that's required for companies to continue on and yeah, continue to grow and prosper. So kind of a distinction is that unloaded rates, the BLS data by itself starts off as a unloaded rate, and then within the tool, there's the ability to add all the different costs to that rate to fully build it out. And then the hourly ceiling rates data is already fully burdened, so it has all the hourly rate components within it, and it also has a very small fee. It's below 1% fee for the industrial funding fee, or it's basically the contract access fee for the multiple award schedule program. The prices paid data also has it is fully burdened as well with the wage rate and all of the overheads, benefits, and profit also. So that's kind of the key distinction is that all of these data sets can become fully burdened, and fully burdened is where you get the most cost comparability to figure out if prices are fair and reasonable or if you're getting a good deal or not. It's just basically one of the data sources, the BLS, you need to kind of go through a process to fully burden it to get it to that loaded rate. All right, we'll jump to the next slide. So yeah, why does the labor hour ceiling rate tool, why does it exist and what is its value? So this data does represent all the awarded contract rates on the multiple award schedule program. A very key delineation here is that these are ceiling rates. So it's the maximum amount that a vendor can charge for their service. So that's a very key item when you're analyzing these rates, that a competitive bid from a vendor will often be and should likely often be below the ceiling rate, because it is the maximum value that a vendor is allowed to charge. The data is also provided based on the education level of the contractor, the work experience, security clearance, work site, and other key fields as well. So kind of each of these fields really drive the overall price of the service that's being provided. For example, if you're a junior contractor, your rate will be lower than a senior or a SME contractor. Or if you are kind of have a different education level, or there's a different education requirement for your job, the rates will likely reflect different values. And this data is also it's here to assist contracting professionals. So you can download the data very easily and put it into your contract file. And that's kind of the goal is to provide market research so that you can document why or why not prices are fair and reasonable, or if you think you're getting a good deal, or maybe need to work back with the contractor to negotiate better rates. All right, we'll go to the next slide. So there are several different use cases for labor hour ceiling prices. First, you can search by labor category. So this is a specific occupation like a data engineer or something of the like. You can also search directly by the vendor. So a vendor could be someone like Deloitte or another contractor that you would want to look up if you know that you're probably going to receive a bid from that contract, or maybe you have information from that contractor. You could use that search method. Kind of related to vendor, you could also look at more of the exact contract that the vendor has and see their pricing related to that. So you could kind of get a preview of their prices and compare them to vendors that to to what the vendor is proposing on a specific task order related to the ceiling rate. So this is an example of kind of the top part of the ceiling rate tool screen on buy.gsa.gov within pricing. And the first thing you can do is you can make a selection depending on which area you want to search by. So do you want to search by a labor category, like a program manager or something like that? Do you want to search by a vendor name? Or do you want to search by a contract number? The default is the labor category because that's the most frequent kind of search criteria that's used by our user base. So then what you can do is you can begin to type in a labor category and make a selection. And yeah, the next slide will go into a little more detail about kind of some tips and tricks to do that search the best. All right. So when you do select a different area to search by, so say it's a labor category, um, and say you want to just kind of look at all project managers or all data related or that has project manager in the title or is specific in that way. And you don't want it to be extremely specific. All you have to do is kind of type in that project manager and then you can hit search. Or you can select, I believe you can also select the first. Um, well, actually, no. Yeah, you just want to t type in there the exact labor category name that you want to input and then hit search. And what that will do is it'll create kind of a loose match where if there's any kind of keywords that include project manager in all the listings, it will show you all those results. So searching in this way is useful because it'll give you a larger number of results that will return to you. And then you kind of have the option to pick through that list and determine, hey, this project manager is not as in line with my acquisition requirement, but this one is. So you can kind of pick and choose what you want to include in your overall analysis. If you want to be very specific and you just want items that only have project manager, like those exact two words, you can select the exact match button, which is in red to the right. And that will just only return results that have exactly project manager in the title. So sometimes this is very helpful if you are extremely specific in what you need. But one thing to be very cognizant of is that likely your volume of data that's returned will be very low if you do use an exact match because there is a lot of different data that's provided by different vendors and kind of the more you isolate it around a couple words the less results you're going to receive. But it is a useful tool in some cases, but just be very careful to assess your sample size. And I'll kind of go into the sample size in a upcoming slide as well. All right. So once you kind of get fully into, well, you're still in the application. So we were just kind of in the blue box at the top where we were in the search by section. We've searched by a project manager here, and now we want to tune our results to meet the acquisition objective that we're trying to seek. So in this case, we're trying to get pricing for a project manager, and then we can input different attributes to fine tune our pricing even more. So for example, you could select education level, and within that, there'd be a drop down for minimum experience requirement or minimum education requirements, being associates or high school, associate's degree, bachelor's, master's, or PhD level. You can also search by the number of years of experience of the contractor, or the minimum experience that's related to the labor category. So, for example, if you're looking for a junior consultant, or you're pricing for that, you'd potentially look for like 0 to 3 years of experience. If you're looking for a senior SME, you'd probably be kind of up in the 10 to 15 years of experience as well. You can also filter on price range. So if you don't feel like prices that are in the very high area are attributable to your analysis or your objective, you can constrain results in that way by implementing a price range. Another field here is the worksite. So this is a very key field. So within the worksite, it will say if the work is happening at a government worksite or a contractor worksite. So if work is happening at a government worksite, rates are generally lower because the government is paying for the rent and overhead for the contractor. But if they're working at a contractor site, the rates are typically higher because the contractor has to pay for that rent and then pass it along through their hourly rates. You can also select the business size, so large business, small business, items like that. You can select if there's a security clearance or not. You can, for kind of mass multiple award schedule specific items, you can select the SIN number as well, or that's a special was it special item number for the multiple award schedule program. You can also filter on the contract year and kind of a category field, which is related to kind of government-wide category management categorizations. So there's a lot of different kind of ways that you can fine-tune the data. And kind of as you're fine-tuning all this data, you can then look at the results. So the histogram to the right will automatically update your standard deviations, all the other data that kind of help you understand pricing will update as well. And you'll also see how many records are being shown as well. So we'll go to the next slide and we'll talk, I think, a little bit more about the records and the histogram. So after you do a search, you will see the search result screen. You will get a nice kind of visual of what the rate distributions of prices look like. You will get some statistics as well with the standard deviation and average. It is want to make very clear that the standard deviation is just a mathematical description of the data. It doesn't necessarily mean that you should determine that only prices within that standard deviation are fair and reasonable or things like that. You still want to use your judgment, but it can help you kind of understand the sample and the prices that you are looking at. You can also see the number of records that return. So kind of below that pricing distribution where it shows the average and the -1 standard deviation and the +1 standard deviation. You see the number of results that are returning, and this is basically the number of prices that you are able to see and to analyze. A very key thing is there's those small black boxes at the far left of each of the line items. So as you kind of read through here and you say, hey, maybe this item is not as related to my acquisition objective, you can cross it out. And what that will do is it will remove it from your overall data. It will also remove it from the distribution, so it won't skew or affect your price analysis. There are also hyperlinks that you can select towards the right part of the data display where you can get more detailed descriptions of the work that's being performed within the labor category. So it's sometimes like a paragraph or two, or sometimes a few sentences about the labor that's being performed. So this information can also help you see if that labor is related to your acquisition objective or not, or what you're trying to find a comparable for. And yeah, make a determination if you want to keep it in the data set or not. Within this, we don't have a picture of it within the slide, but there is also a median and percentile data view snapshot that is available. So I would recommend to kind of toggle between the average and standard deviation histogram, which is showing right here, and the median and percentile snapshot as well. The benefit of a median and percentile data view is that it's not as skewed by outlier records either on the high end of prices or low end of prices, the way that an average is. Um, so if you do have some very large prices that are showing up in your data view, you might be better suited with the median as your kind of basis for price analysis, median and percentiles. All right. Yeah, there is also, oh, sorry. Within that data view, yeah, there is also information on the worksite. So it'll have kind of all your key attributes that you searched on in there as well to describe that price and that rate. Yeah, thank you. Good. Next slide. All right. So then you've kind of fine-tuned your results. You have a data output that you're good to go with. You then have multiple options to get this data into an Excel download or via PDF. So this is where you can either download the data and do further price analysis if you wanted to, or you could just add this information to your contract file. So this to help support your market research. So there is an option within that same page that we were just looking at in the prior screen to download this data as a PDF. There's also an option to download the graph, and you can export an Excel version of the data as well. So you have multiple options to download this information to support your contracting file. So just some quick notes on hourly labor ceiling rate data. All the data is fully burdened. It is from the multiple award schedule. Uh, Mostly, the data is largely professional services and IT labor categories. There is some facilities management data in there as well, and there will be much more data in the near future because we have an internal capability that we're turning on that will increase the volume of data that is available in the CALC tool. So there's a pretty broad section of labor within the ceiling rate data set. The data is also updated daily with new fresh price lists that are uploaded by the vendors. And the data is also ceiling rate data. So just stressing that it is the highest rate that a vendor can charge, and that customers or contracting professionals should be able to negotiate lower rates than the ceiling rate. So it's basically the highest amount that they can go to. With large companies that are operating across the whole United States, they will also generally have a very high ceiling rate because they could be operating in San Diego or San Francisco or New York, which have very uh, high overall rates, or they could be operating in Kansas or Alabama or one of those areas with very low rates. So their overall ceiling rate is set at that highest level. So just want to be cognizant of that. Kind of on the flip side of that, if a small business is very specific to one single geography, maybe they only work within Washington, D.C., or maybe they only work within a specific part of Alabama. Their ceiling rate is probably representing that geography. So they may not have as much wiggle room as a large vendor would, who set their ceiling rate as kind of a nationwide ceiling rate. So that's kind of an important item to think about when you're analyzing this data and reviewing it. Th This data is also does not represent geographic locations specifically. Yeah, and some vendors operate in a specific location, and some operate nationwide as well. But we will in the next couple slides or upcoming slides, we'll talk about a tool that can help you with geographic location analysis. Yep. So now we'll go to the BLS tool, Bureau of Labor Statistics. So this is where we're starting off with a wage rate for a specific occupation or labor category, and then we're building that rate by adding the overhead and those other cost components to create a fully burdened rate. The really nice thing about Bureau of Labor Statistics data is that they capture their data geographically, and they capture it by metropolitan statistical area. They also capture it by state and by city as well. I think there's over 550 geographies that they capture data for. So it's very representative of the United States overall, and kind of pr price differences across the U.S. Another key benefit of BLS data is that it includes NAICS data, or kind of an industry component also. So this is very important. So for example, you could see a software engineer who's operating maybe within the transportation industry, and then you could see a software engineer who's maybe working on AI or some sort of much more technical capability, like a research type of industry. So you can kind of also see rates related to the industry of which that work originates, which is definitely a value add because that can alter prices as well. You can also see data by occupation level, and I'll kind of go through some of those occupation levels in a future slide here. Um, This is also a really good data source if you can't find a specific labor category that's in the ceiling rate tool. So maybe it's a one that we just don't have a lot of data for, or it's a more niche labor category. This is a great tool to use. Also, if you're very isolated within a specific geography of where you know the work will be performed, this can be a great tool as well. It can also just be used as an additional data source for price reasonableness determination. So it is preferred that acquisition professionals seek multiple data sources and do research in multiple places before determining price is fair and reasonable, or that the government is getting a good price. All right, we'll jump to the next slide. All right, so there's a few different use cases for BLS data. The first is it can be used for to develop cost estimates. Um, so this can also be useful for cost type contracting, where you're building from that wage rate and you're adding the different rate components to it. But it can also be useful for just overall horizontal price comparison when you do fully burden that rate and you want to compare it to other rates that you're seeing. So it could be a rate that a vendor has proposed through the mass contract. It could be a rate that the vendor has bid for to try to win a task order. Any of those components. Uh, you can also leverage it for geographical data. So yeah, if you know a specific location, it's a great data source for that as well. Also, yeah, if you can't find that specific labor category that you're searching for, I think there are over 800 occupations that are available in this BLS data set, and it's also occupations. It's supposed to represent the entire United States, and the primary or the most frequently um, used occupations are in this data set. So it is very comprehensive. So that's definitely a value add to the BLS data. Right. So now we're jumping into the application where you start your search for a specific labor category. So in this example, this user has searched for a manager, and then you see much more specific managers start to populate. So then you can select which type of manager that you're looking for. So in this example, you're looking for an industrial production manager. So then once you're okay with that, you know that that's what you want to select. You would click on that in the dropdown, and then it would begin to show you the initial wage rate for that value. So it'll start returning that BLS data and help you build that wage rate. If you are also savvy with BLS data, there is something called a SOC ID that is kind of native terminology to BLS and this data source. So if you know the exact labor ID from BLS, you can also type that in as well. It's likely that that functionality won't be as used as frequently, but if you are very savvy with um, that data, you can input that also. So this is now where you've searched for your primary labor category. You're looking for an industrial operation manager, and then now you have the opportunity to fully burden that data. So there's kind of that picture of the potato where you keep adding your toppings onto the potato to make it a full hourly wage rate that is comparable to other wage rates, or it's comparable to a contract bid that you're seeing in negotiation. So this is where you can input different percentages for general and administrative costs, overhead, fringe benefits, fee profit, and materials and subcontracting if that is part of the overall cost structure. So sometimes material and subcontracting is not applicable to your acquisition. So in those cases, there isn't a need to fill that out, but it is occasionally necessary. So that's why we did include that as an option as well. So then if you kind of hover over, you could be like, yeah, I'm not really certain exactly what these different cost types mean. I need more information. And when you're in the application, you can hover over the small blue area that's right by the name of each of these percentage inputs. So for example, by general and administrative, there's that little I button. And if you hover over that, it will provide all the directions below here. And what it does is it also provides you ranges of kind of reasonable ranges of data inputs that you could provide. So if you don't know any of these components, which is often the case, because it's hard to know exactly what a company's overhead is or what their G&A fringe benefits, it kind of gives you some guardrails of items that you can input. So you can also kind of play around with these percentages. So maybe you want to see the low end of each of the percentages first and kind of see how the rate builds and what that rate looks like. And then maybe you want to look at something that's in the middle, and then something that is on the high side as well. So you can kind of toggle these percentages and play with them over time to get the best information to help with your cost estimate. So this is a view of I think this is after the data has been fully burdened. So this could be the hourly rate that returns to the user. And it could be $56. And we will update this deck to 2024. We do have 2024, and you can escalate to 2025 data in the current application. But you can see the wage rate here is $56 that's returned. You then have the opportunity to escalate that information, or basically bring it up to current rates. So if we have 2024 BLS data that's available at the time, you do have the opportunity to add that kind of inflationary escalation rate to bring it up to current costs. That the BLS data is also refreshed annually, and we refresh that automatically once we get a brand new file in from the data. But that is also why escalating is very critical to making sure you're at the current date if you're doing a current cost analysis. The user is also able to select multiple different escalation rates. So there is a 10-year average that shows up. There's a 5-year average. I think there's a 3-year as well. And there is also a custom. And we are also working to develop an ECI economic. It's an index that's provided by BLS as well, related to inflation to include that rate in the near future as well. So you have multiple options to escalate your data and bring it up to the current level that you need. So kind of with the data output, so you will see those larger tiles with your overall rate. You then can also select or see the different locations of where that work is being performed. You can also see kind of the price differences. So for example, this in this search, the user also selected a occupation level of a journeyman. So that's kind of the skill level or experience level of that contractor. And then you can see the difference in prices between Akron, Ohio, and Asheville, North Carolina, here. If we probably were to put New York City or another location on here, that rate could maybe be like 60, $63. So there is quite a larger cost difference between different geographies. So this is why, yeah, this tool can be really helpful for geographical analysis because yeah, it has that component built in as well. You can also search by the NAICS. Yeah, I'll touch on one more quick thing here. So on the very far right in this search, the user selected, "Hey, I just want to view data across all industries. I'm not interested in a specific industry." So that's why the NAICS code is all zeros. But if you wanted to focus on a specific industry, so it could be an R&D industry or travel and transportation or things like that, you can also make those selections and analyze the rates in that way as well. Yeah, there are also these filters where you can select the specific geography. You can select the specific industry. You can also select specific geography by state as well. So kind of the difference between MSA and state is that MSA will include city information. So it's called a major metropolitan statistical area. I think that there are also minor metropolitan statistical areas in there, but it's basically grouped around cities or surrounding areas. So for example, in Washington, D.C., the MSA will be Washington, D.C. and the surrounding area, which includes kind of the suburbs in Virginia, in Maryland, and I think maybe slightly in West Virginia as well, because it covers different locations. So yeah, that's where you can really fine tune the geography of the pricing that you want to receive. You can also select the occupation level, which which kind of gives the level of experience of the contractor. So for example, if you're selecting a junior in there, you can see that data, and it'll basically bring in the lower wage rate data into your results that are being shown. Or if you look at the 90th percentile, it will bring up the higher wage rates into your data view. And we'll jump to the next one as well. All right, so we'll start with transition now to prices paid data. So we've talked about ceiling rate data. We've talked about BLS data. So this is now the third data source that is available in Pricing Central on buy.gsa.gov. So this is data that comes from GSA's very large government-wide contracts, and it might be contracts that you're familiar with. So it's the 8A STARS program, Alliant 2 and VETS 2, which are all technology focused. There is also OASIS and HCATS. Quite a bit of OASIS and HCATS data that is available and just has recently become available there as well. So this is to kind of differentiate it from the other data sources. This is task order level pricing, and it's prices paid. So it's prices that the government has actually paid for prior services. So this creates the best picture of kind of true cost of what the service might be. Um, and it is through the collection of invoice data that the GSA collects through authorities that we have, or basically, yeah, through authorities of these acquisition vehicles that allow us to collect this information from vendors. These rates also come from time and material and labor hour contracts, and they reflect fully burdened rates. You can also export data easily to add it to your contract file. All right, so prices paid data use cases. You can use it for historical analysis, seeing the trends of pricing over time. You could use it to evaluate current pricing. So maybe you have multiple bids from a contractor and you want to see prior prices paid data that could be a good match for your current acquisition objective. That's a good use case as well. Um, you can also kind of leverage it to look at escalation rates that may have happened over time or impacts of inflation, things like that. So there's multiple uses for this data. It can also be used in price reasonableness determinations as an additional data source. Uh, yep, we'll go to the next slide. Right, so there is a sign-in that's required to access this data because it is more sensitive, because it's prices paid data from specific vendor transactions. So you will be required to sign in once you collect or once you select that you want to leverage this tool. So then you'll hit the sign in create account button, and so it'll be that button there, and we'll go to the next slide. You will see if you do need to set up an account, you will be prompted. It'll give you instructions about how to do that. If you are internal to the government, you can use a PIF card as well. So just some background info there. You will see an immediate disclaimer, just saying that this is more sensitive data than what you've been previously seeing, and that some of it's proprietary. And basically, it's telling you do not share this, with other individuals, especially outside of the government, because it is sensitive pricing data that came through a contract award. So you do need to acknowledge that this disclosure before you enter the application. So to acknowledge it, you would select that check mark. Then you'd be able to view and analyze the data. So this is an example of prices paid data. So in this search, this is for a specific labor category. We'll just say this is for a software engineer. So then it provides kind of a range of overall percentile values to the user. So it says the 50th percentile, which is the median, is $121 here. 30th percentile is $99. 70th is 145. Then it kind of shows that percentile distribution in a picture. Just a note that we have more recently switched all the color schemes up to blue and kind of focused the blue around the middle points of the prices. But this is very similar to the data view that you will see within the application. Users also do have the opportunity to switch to that average and standard deviation view by selecting that small radio button in the application to go to the other view. All right, we'll go to the next slide. Yes, this is kind of comparing different data views. So on the left, you see the median and percentile data. On the right, you see the average and standard deviation data. So you kind of see they're two different distributions, two ways of viewing the data. You can also see that there's quite a bit of what's called skewedness to the data set that you can see on the right. So this is why the median might be the better use, or the kind of the better data source to use there, because of that skewness of a few very high prices that are kind of getting a little technical here, but pulling the distribution to the right. So you do have the option to kind of look at these different data views and then figure out which statistics or information is most useful to me for this objective. So yeah, you can search prices paid data by SOC ID. All this data is also by BLS labor category. So you can search by that. You can search it by the labor category title or name, which is the BLS labor category, the specific contract vehicle. So you could type Oasis or put Alliant or some of those contract vehicles in there as well. So there are quite a few options for the ways that you can search. You can then filter results kind of with all the same as all the other applications. There's filters where you can tune the results to best meet your acquisition objective. So you can look at the labor category level, which is kind of the level of experience of a junior, journeyman, senior, or SME contract professional. You can also filter by the contract vehicle. You can filter by the work site as well. Is it a government work site or a contractor work site? You can also search across multiple years of data. So it is defaulted to the most current year because the most current data is used most frequently for current rate analysis. But you can shift that back to 36 months or 3 years if you did want to look at some trending data as well, or if you're confident in doing some escalations to bring it up to current date. All right, yeah, we'll jump to the next slide. So this is an explanation of the labor category levels. I won't kind of read fully through these, but the slide deck will be provided along with this meeting as well. But it kind of shows the differentiation between a junior, journeyman, senior, and SME, and that's kind of how they're cascading is by increasing level of experience and duties for each of those. So that those kind of help you understand what those different levels are. So yeah, quick notes on prices paid data. So the data sources is GSA's large MAC and GWAC contracts. Oasis and HCATS is in there right now, so that's awesome. So it's a larger data set, and it does use BLS labor categories as well. You can also view line item results and prices paid information, and you can view data by labor category level, contract vehicle, things like that. And kind of the best thing about prices paid data is that it is prices paid, so it's the purest form of actual cost. But also a downside is you always want to look at your sample size. So you want to make sure that you have a pretty decent size or a decent sample of prices paid data before you make any large determinations. So if you just have one or two results or maybe just a handful, or I'd say under 10 maybe as a general rule, you kind of really want to ask yourself, is that sample large enough for me to make a conclusion on price reasonableness? So that is a little bit of a downside of prices paid data is that the sample sizes are smaller than BLS and the ceiling rate tool right now. But we are also working to get a whole lot more prices paid data in here into the application in the near future with transactional data reporting in that effort. But that is a constraint right now is that you need to be very wary of the sample sizes. Make sure you assess that before you make any determinations. Yeah, so here's a view. It's a histogram view of prices paid data. Uh, um, I'll kind of jump to the bottom here. You can see the number of records that are provided back. You can see the city, so the geographic information as well, the level of experience, all those key items. All right, yeah, we'll jump to the next slide. I am going to speed up a little bit, so we just have a little bit of time for Q&A at the end also. All right, so the IGC tool is the fourth tool that's available in the Calc Plus uh, pricing suite, and this is where you can develop a cost estimate for your acquisition objective, and it'll take you through all the steps to help you build a rate with the different data sources or with some of the different data sources that we've been talking about. You can also export data and add it to your contract file easily. All right, we'll jump to next slide. All right, so there is a sign-in required as well for the IGC tool. So once you kind of select that button, you'll then sign in to create an account, and then you'll move to the next step. All right, the first option you have is to give your IGC a name. So this is really nice because you can go back and you can look at prior IGCs that you've created, or maybe you're continually working on an IGCE, a cost estimate over time, and you want to keep going back to revisit it. So that's why it's really important to name your IGC, and you have the option to do that kind of in the first step here. Yeah, note that the IGC tool is in beta. It's further along in beta, but it is still a newer tool. Yeah, make sure that the title is meaningful so you remember it when you kind of come back, and also select your agency. So this kind of helps us track the usage of how of who's creating IGCs, which is really helpful. All right, we'll go to the next slide. The next step is um, to add, well, this is kind of a walkthrough of all the steps. So there's six steps to the whole process. The first step is to add the period of performance, or basically say when the contract start and end date is, and then begin to add your direct costs, begin to add your ODCs, your other direct costs, your travel, and all those other smaller components that get you to your final estimate. All right, we'll jump to the next slide. So the second step, after you put your period of performance in there, is to add direct labor. So you can either add direct labor manually. So say you know a rate and you just want to use a tool to kind of help you build a rate and document it really well. So you can manually add that information in, or you can search for occupations and rates by selecting the blue button. So in the next slide, we'll kind of go through if you were to select or you wanted to search for rate. So if you do search for a rate, it will immediately take you to the ceiling rate data, and you can kind of perform the same exact price analysis research and then find the rate that you want to select. So kind of within that orange area, you would then select that rate, and it will bring it back into your IGCE. All right, so we'll jump to the next slide. And then what you can do is you can then keep adding more and more direct rates or more and more labor line items. So for example, if you have a software development contract or you're building an application and you have nine contractors working on it, you could build in each of those different labor types into the tool. You can also select to enable indirect rates. So if you have a BLS wage rate and you want to fully burden that, you can put that wage rate in and then select this button and then add in those percentages that help you fully burden the data. So you can also add option years to your IGCE. So if it's a multi-year contract and you want to add in escalation, you can do that. So there is a button at the very top right. Well, first you'll see your base period, which is kind of the base that you're working with, and then you have the option to bring all that forward as well. So you can hit this create new, and you can either copy from the base and then add escalation, or you can create a brand new one. So within that, there is an option to add that escalation rate. There's that drop down where you can input the percentage, and then it helps you build those option years into your IGCE and copy those over really really quickly. So there's some time savings within this component. All right, we'll go to the next slide. This is a step where you can add other direct costs. So you can add items like subcontracts if there is subcontracting, order level materials if there's specific materials that are needed to complete the job. Maybe there's other consultants that are needed, or there's just other general costs. You can add those line items to your contract. So kind of in that direct labor screen, you're basically inputting hourly rates of the contracting staff, and then this is where you're adding kind of those other costs in. All right, we'll jump to the next slide. You can then add travel. So if there is a need for travel, you can type in the travel that's needed, a description, and input the cost as well. So in the end, you then have a full estimate. So you've built your full IGC, you've thought of all the different costs, you've input them, and then you can see a nice view of all the different cost types that are going into your overall estimate. So then you have the ability to download and export this data into a really nice format in Excel for your contracting record. You also have the ability to go back and edit your estimates. So maybe you're like, oh, something looks a little weird here. You have the opportunity to go back to any of these sections and edit. So that's kind of the overall IGC tool. One part that was missing, I talked about it, but it was missing slightly, is there is that nice Excel output. as well, which gives you a really good thing for your contract file. If you do have any kind of questions in the future, please feel free to email this inbox at dx@gsa.gov. We are also just interested in continually learning from our user base, learning what's working, what's not. Also, additional ideas for what could be good enhancements. We're open to all that feedback, thoughts, and ideas. So please, yeah, get in touch with us. Yep. If you also have a question, feel free to reach out to me directly. If you need help adding a user ID through Fast ID support, there is a phone number here and a email box also. Yep. Yeah, and thank you for taking the time today to join the session.
Well, looks like we're moving to the Q&A session if there are any. Let me check. I don't think I see any specific Q&A right now. Um, well, if that's the case, I think we can end the session unless you have any other tips or things that wasn't covered in the deck. But I think,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, good to go.
All right. Well, I'm gonna close out the session now. Thank you all for attending the session, and thank you, Mark, for this very informative presentation and walking us through this. If you have any questions, additional questions, please email them to professionalservices@gsa.gov. And our next professional services and human capital categories office hours is on August 14th, and the topic will be on evaluation factors and best practices. And again, the one CLP will be sent following the webinar, and the webinar recording for this session will be posted on our PSHC Office Hours YouTube playlist in about 3 weeks. We appreciate your feedback for this session by completing the survey at the end, and thank you all so much. We'll see you in August. Thank you.